let's get this stream started, I suppose. Let's change some things up here. Guess go to my channel. Yep. Let's see here. I'm gonna edit this category. Reading and fiction. Nice. Reading aloud. Cool. Alright, there we go. Pretty simple. It's all in the title here. Alright. Close that down and exit that. Because probably it's going to pick up the audio from the, what's it called here? Yep, it's picking up that. It's got my name on it. Just the mic. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Turn that up all the way. Alright. Yeah, just go back to my favorite setting. There we go. Okay. So, we are literally just reading fan fiction. Out loud. Because I'm tired of playing games. Not like, it's kind of like the idea of, oh, I'm tired of playing games because of dating. But no, just like I'm literally tired of streaming World of Warcraft. As you can see, I have crazy bed hair. I'm having a lazy day today. I might stream later, but stream later in the form of video games, but like, whatever. So, or I'm just going to read and practice out loud reading. I hope you enjoy it. It is what it is. And let's get at it, huh? All right. So here's what we're doing today. All right, we are reading A Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire fan fiction. It's called The Promised Prince. Jon Snow self-insert by Dragon Spectre 01. All right, here we go. Let's read a fan fiction. Davos had to admit that he was really living in a fucked up world. He was not a stranger to this truth, nor was he new. There we go, that feels nice. Yeah, there we are. Nor was he new in getting this enlightenment. He knew this from the moment he lived his life in the flea bottom. It's got a bit of grammatical problems. Is that it? Yeah, there we go. From a young age, he lived on a street full of shit of the High Lords occupying the Red Keep. From a young age, he decided that he would make his way in the world on his own terms. For a time, that belief made him strong and made him one of the best smugglers. He made his living in avoiding the law set by the High Lords. He thought it fair, seeing as most lords avoided his kind like the plague and treated them to some filth that was beneath their boots. For a time, his life was adventurous, and he lived by his creed happily enough. Then he met his wife-to-be and started a family. He had children, and every time he would go out into the sea to feed his family, he had to watch their fearful eyes stained with worry. Every time he saw that look, he felt a heaviness in his heart, but he knew no other craft other than being a smuggler. Smuggling things had become his way of life, and he couldn't find a way out of his line of work. When Westeros plunged into a war that raged over a year, he made a fortune of smuggling things. After that, every highborn, as well as every able-bodied small folk, was off fighting someone's war. It was at this point that he saw an opportunity, and that's how he sailed into Storm's End, with his boat full of salted beef and some onions. He had to evade being detected by the Red Wine Fleet, but after a lifetime of evading the Royal Fleet, this new self-adopted mission was too easy. It was there that he met Stannis Baratheon, and all that he desired and more was given by Stannis. He may have lost his fingers, but Stannis Baratheon was just and honorable. But Davos had the misfortune of watching the great man become twisted by his desire for the Iron Throne. The once just man became a twisted fanatic by a group of fanatics that surrounded the rightful king of Westeros. Oof. Definitely needs an editor, but then again, this is fan fiction. After the defeat, King Stannis suffered in Blackwater Bay. It was Davos that suggested Stannis lead the remainder of his army, to the Wall. It was a sound plan, and they even managed to defeat the wildlings there to save the Night's Watch, as well as the other northern houses. It was at the Wall that he met Jon Snow, and even King Stannis was very taken with the boy. That was why, despite knowing the conflicting oath the boy took, King Stannis offered to legitimize the boy as Jon Stark. When the boy refused that offer for staying true to his vows, he knew King Stannis was disappointed, but he knew the man was very impressed. When the time came for the king to march his armies and retake the north from the Boltons, Davos was ordered to return to the Wall halfway through the march. No matter how much Davos begged the king, he still took Shireen and his queen with his army, and he had the distinct impression it was because of the Red Woman. While Stannis marched his army through the north, Jon Snow, who was elected as the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, managed to save some wildlings from Hardhome. The majority of the wildlings were children and women. The brothers of Night's Watch were not happy with Jon Snow's decision, and tensions were running high. This was over the fact that those who went with Jon Snow saw the army of the dead and White Walkers, while an uneasy peace prevailed in the Night's Watch, prevailed as the Night's Watch opened the tunnels to let the wildlings settle in the gift. The Red Priestess returned all alone. Davos repeatedly questioned her about Shireen, but the Red Woman would not speak of the girl or the battle. All she said was that the battle was lost and everyone died, including Stannis, Queen Selyse, and little Shireen. Davos was wroth with rage at the Red Woman, and he would have truly killed that woman if it wasn't for what happened to Jon Snow. The young lad was betrayed by his own brothers of the Night's Watch and stabbed to death under the cover of darkness. Right now, that same lad was sitting not 3 feet from him, glaring into the flames with a cup of ale in his hands. Davos hated to admit it, but resurrecting Jon Snow was the one good deed done by the Red Woman since she came to Westeros. "Are you all right, lad?" Davos asked, gently, knowing full well just how fucked up everything was. "I shouldn't be here. This is wrong. I died, and yet I'm alive. I should be with God and be at peace," said Jon. And Davos let out a silent sigh of relief, as that was the first words Jon Snow uttered after he was resurrected a few moments ago. Nothing makes sense anymore. We were told magic doesn't exist, but we know that to be true. We were told the White Walkers don't exist, but we know them to be real. You were dead a few moments ago, but now you are alive. It shouldn't be possible, but it is what it is, said Davos. But he could see that Jon was still brooding with a strange look on his face. "Look, I somewhat understand what you're going through. You tried your best to do your duty as Lord Commander, and you had to make a decision that was not seen favorably by the rest of your sworn brothers. You died because of their treachery, and yet here you are, a second chance at life. Do you know how many would yearn for a second chance? Yet here you are, the luckiest of them all, and you can do a lot of good with this chance. You've already did a lot of good when you saved thousands of people and brought them safely across the Wall. Our world is a shit world, but it is the few people like you that give our world a small ray of hope for the future. Now, it is you who has to decide whether you continue to do good or wallow in self-pity." After that little pep talk, Davos noted that Jon was staring at him with an unreadable look. "You are a good man, Sir Davos, and you are right. I shouldn't be wallowing in self-pity when a lot of people are at risk," Jon said as he nodded to himself as if coming to a decision. "What happened after I was, Jon asked awkwardly. "Sir Alistair and his cohorts took over the Night's Watch. Your friend Ed and some like-minded sworn brothers kept your body from being burnt. The Red Woman resurrected you, and while that happened, Ed managed to enlist the help of the Free Folk. They were understandably not happy to learn that the person that saved them was stabbed to death. Sir Alistair and his co-conspirators have been caught and await your judgment," Davos explained, and for a moment he watched as Jon again descended into deep thought. "I don't know if I can do it, or if I should. What right do I have to take their lives? They were doing what they thought was right. The Night's Watch has fought wildlings ever since it was first established, and that age-old rivalry and hate was not going to vanish just because I forced the issue. Then again, I didn't have much of a choice in that matter. Time was not on my side. John let out a disappointed sigh as he started to brood again. As you said, time was not on your side. At the moment, you did what you thought was best. Not everyone will understand or even agree with your actions, but you did what was done, and there are thousands of people who owe you for that decision. I'd say that makes you the greatest Lord Commander the Night's Watch has ever seen. If you ask why, then, I would say it is because you saved more lives than you ever took, said Davos, and he watched on as John nodded to himself and stood up from his seat. I should have listened more closely to Meister Aemon's advice. Kill the boy and let the man be born, he said. I took action and saved the free folk, but I didn't take any action, even when I knew that the watch was divided. I should have acted first and stamped out any rebellious thoughts. I made that mistake, and I won't repeat that again, said John, and Davos watched as the young lad secured Longclaw on his waist. With quick, measured steps, he watched John step out of the room into the cold, frigid air of the north. Not wanting to be left out, Davos also stepped out right beside John, and he followed the lad down the steps. The silence in Castle Black was palpable, and Davos noticed their footsteps echoed within the walls. The free folk and the brothers of Night's Watch were staring at John as if he was a stranger given life, or the old gods. He was not sure if the gods they believed in, but by their looks, he could see awe and fear, a healthy combination that was reserved for a god, in his opinion. Davos watched on as John exchanged words with Tormund, who led the wildlings into Castle Black, and Ed, who was a trusted friend of John. When John climbed up the steps to where all the traitors were set up to be hanged, he moved closer, as did others, to hear what John had to say. Instead of hearing out the last wishes of the traitors like he thought, John instead addressed the free folk and the Night's Watch. When I made the decision to let the free folk settle south of the wall, I did it with the intention of saving them and us. We all know that the White Walkers and an army of dead people march on the wall. Everyone living north of the wall... One second, everybody. Just gotta mute my mic.
Are you streaming?
Yes, cool. Your hair looks nice now that it's dry.
Does it look good?
Yeah, it looks good. It's got that. I like the nape of the neck. I actually think women have good. I like short hair. It looks nice.
Okay.
All right, enjoy your day, Mom. Love you too. If you need me, I'm not wearing any headphones, so you can just text me on my phone or something.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. All right. Let's get back at it. All right. Where was I? Okay. Everyone living north of the wall will be made to fight for the Night King, and I had the choice of letting the free folk die at his hands or save them. I chose to save them because they are the living, breathing beings just like us. I can't say the same for the White Walkers and their army of the dead men. When they come, and they will come, I had hoped that all the living must be gathered here to fight the darkness together. We may have our differences, but the Night's Watch is an order that is sworn to protect what's south of the wall. We cannot protect the realms of men if we are going to fight 100,000 or double that number of dead people. But some of you refuse to even understand what is at stake and still hold on to your hate of the free folk, even as we face annihilation. John threw a dirty look at Alistair Thorne and continued, These fine men behind me had similar beliefs, and their blind hatred made them stab me under the cover of night. They didn't have the decency to even fight me face to face, as real men should have. They are cowards. When they took the sword against me, they took the sword against all of mankind. For that action, there's only one punishment: death. John shouted as he swung his sword and cut the rope to the trapdoor. All of the traitors hung on the rope, and Davos saw that John was breathing quite haggardly by now. John walked down the podium and turned to Ed, who was standing next to him. Make sure they are dead, and then tie them to a rope and throw them over the wall. If they are raised from the dead, cut off their legs and arms and secure them in a box with chains. If we are to make the Lords of Westeros take us seriously, we need to show them proof, said John, and he was about to move forward, but paused halfway and unfastened his cloak. My watch has ended, said John, as he handed over his black cloak to Ed and walked out of the courtyard. The brothers of the Night's Watch, as well as the free folk, never spoke a word, all too stricken by what had happened in the span of a few moments. Later, when Davos was growing concerned with the continued absence of John at Castle Black, he found out that one of the guards that John had gone north of the wall and was praying before a heart tree. While Davos had some real concerns about the north of the wall, he decided not to disturb the young lad. No, you're not late, Cara the Floof. Hello, how are you? I'm tired just look at the description. I don't want to, I am not optimally, I'm reading fan fiction. That's what I'm doing. I'm reading. I don't want to stream video games right now, but I want to make productive day, so I'm practicing my reading and my vocal endurance. So, yes, you are not late, but we're in the middle of the first chapter of a fan fiction. So, hope you know your Game of Thrones stuff, because here we go. Alright, where was I? Alright, let's see. While Davos had some real concerns about the north of the wall, he decided not to disturb the No, you can talk. There's no problem. Feel free to chat. I'm just not going to respond much because I'm going to be reading. So, do what you will with that. Okay. Alright, while Davos had some real concerns about the north of the wall, he decided not to disturb the young lad. Already he could see too many changes in Jon Snow. While the usual brooding was still there, the lad walked differently than before. When Davos had seen him first, the lad walked as if there was a great weight on his shoulders, and now he walked straight, head held high. While there was nothing wrong with that, there was also the way Jon Snow was speaking. The Jon he knew was a man of few words, and the speech that he delivered before the Night's Watch really troubled Davos. Actually, probably what you're doing is appropriate, Cara. Just, you can listen, and, yeah, you can, is it my right eye? Yeah, you can listen, and you can just minimize it and do something else. Probably the best thing to do right now. Back to the story. Okay. And the speech that he delivered before the Night's Watch really troubled Davos. Still, it was understandable, as the lad was dead a few minutes before, so there ought to be some changes. He prayed that there were not too many changes. He could already see the Red Woman watching the tunnel like a hawk, and he swore to himself that he won't allow her claws to dig into Jon Snow. Not while he was still breathe. I think he meant breathing. Fanfiction. Not so good of grammar or such. Alright. Jon Snow was very confused and afraid when he breathed again like the rest of the living. It was not just because he was dead a few minutes ago, but rather he was not exactly himself, and at the same time he was. When he returned from whenever it was his soul went after death, he returned with another soul. He was Jon Snow, but at the same time he was Christopher Pole. He felt like he had lived another entire life that looked frankly magical compared to the one that he was currently occupying. Christopher was someone that worked as a freelance mercenary. Most of the time he dealt with acquiring sensitive information for business tycoons, and even occasionally for the government. Christopher died when one such mission turned out to be a trap, and the next thing he knew he was bombarded by Jon Snow's memories, feelings, and instincts. The shock from his death, as well as waking up in another body with a whole set of new memories, really did a number on his mental facilities. It took him almost an hour to accept that he was in the body of Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell and Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. While an internal battle was raging inside his mind between the personalities of Jon Snow and Christopher Pole, the outside world was going nuts. There was the Red Priestess, who was obsessed with her god, and then there was Sir Davos, who was intent on keeping said priestess at bay. In that situation, the only thing he could do was shut up and block out their whining. It should have taken almost an hour to get some grip on his waning sanity, and he followed through with his actions as best he could. While his head was pounding with a megaton headache, he managed to greet Davos, Tormund, and Edmund, and Ed. He did all he could to sound sane enough, and hanged the traitors. Immediately after that, he went straight for a weirwood tree, because that was the only place where Jon could find some semblance of peace and quiet. That was where that was how he found himself staring at the white weirwood tree. It was the same tree that witnessed John's vow to the Night's Watch. For quite a long time, he sat before the tree and stared unblinkingly at the face that was carved on it. After some time, he felt himself move, almost as if in trance. He felt a weight on his hand, and he realized that it was Longclaw. Without a shred of doubt, he began hacking at the carved face of the tree. After 3 long blows, Longclaw had a green stain on its edge, and John stopped hacking. Stabbing his sword to the ground, he removed the gloves from his hand. He pressed his palm tightly on his blade, and the sharp edge of the Valyrian steel blade easily bit into his palm, drawing blood. At this point, he didn't have the foggiest what he was doing, and he was working on pure instinct. He smeared the blood on the tree, and with his bleeding palm, he gathered the green paste as much as his hand could collect. Not wasting a moment, he began to lap it up, and, strangely, it tasted like amla juice. It was a bitter taste, but at this point, John was beyond caring. As the last bit of green paste trickled through his throat, he felt a blackness consuming him, and he knew no more. "So strange. You have broken out of the chains of fate. I wonder what you will do, Jon Snow. I should not be this surprised, as you carry the unpredictability of the wolf's blood and the sheer power of the dragon blood. I wish you good fortune in the wars to come." John heard a voice whispering from the darkness that was around him, and then there was a flash of light that lit up his eyes in white. One by one, every shred of memory, since the moment he was born in the Tower of Joy to the moment he died, was getting hammered up into his head one after the other. Unlike the last moment, he was not getting a splitting headache, but rather he was feeling as if he was reliving the last 17 years in one go. He felt the disappointment when he learned that he was a bastard and what it meant. He felt like an outsider in Winterfell, and the desire to get the Stark name took root in his mind. He felt shame. He felt for being the stain of honor of Lord Eddard Stark, his father, who turned out to be his uncle. He felt the cold looks that he received from Lady Catelyn, and the pain he felt when he realized that he would never be accepted at Winterfell. He felt the moment that he realized he must take the black rather than suffer being the outsider in Winterfell. He felt the disappointment when he realized that his father, uncle, never warned him about the sorry state of the Night's Watch after seeing the truth by his own eyes. He felt an ocean of rage and anguish as one by one his family was slaughtered in the south. He felt the heartache and almost swallowing him whole when he was watched helplessly as Ygritte died right before his eyes. He felt the profound loss when he burned her body in the woods. Then finally he felt the shock and pain as he was betrayed by his own sworn brothers. With a choked gasp, his awareness returned to his body, and he felt as if he was actually sane for the first time since he had woke up in this world. There were no voices or flashes of memory that were distracting him from the reality around him. He now realized who he was. He is Jon Snow, but his given name was Daeron Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, rightful heir of the Iron Throne of Westeros. By this point, he was on his knees before the weirwood tree. He picked himself up from the snow and accidentally placed his hand on the weirwood tree. The warmth passed through his body and felt his consciousness partially separate from his body. The next thing he knew, he was inside of Castle Black's kennel. He realized he had warged into Ghost, and he was seeing through the eyes of his loyal companion. The wolf promptly howled, and Jon didn't know whether it was in joy or pain. He would like to think that it was the joy, as their minds synced far better than ever before. He was starting to feel even a trickle of emotion from Ghost, and he was relieved to know it was content mixed with some happiness. For a brief moment, he found himself in his body, but quickly, once again, he warged on instinct. This time he was in a dark room, but as time passed, his vision began to clear up slowly. While visibility was low, he could make out a serpentine figure beside him. As the question of what it was he was seeing crossed in his mind, the answer was delivered in a screech. Viserion, brother. It was then that Jon realized he had warged into Rhaegal, the green dragon that Daenerys had named after her elder brother Rhaegar. Jon was really stunned for a moment when he could warg into a dragon, and that too, even when they were miles apart. Miles apart? Dude, you're like a continent and a half apart. That's like thousands of miles at least. Or tens of thousands of kilometers. Wow. Jon was really stunned. His mind flashed through plans in a second, and a distant memory of his studies with Maester Lewin came to his mind. Sorvagon, Jon commanded in High Valyrian through the mental link. Jon was taking a shot in the dark, but luckily it struck true. Rhaegal began to breathe flames into the walls beneath the pyramid, and the intense heat was melting down the stones in quick order. The green dragon swung its tail and smashed the rest of the stone wall away and quickly took the skies. Jon could hear the screeches from Viserion via the mental link, but Rhaegal continued to fly. The strange thing was, he was getting the feeling that Rhaegal was searching through his memories at a pace that was frankly alarming. Even with his warging powers, he couldn't exactly shield himself from Rhaegal accessing his memories. The only option was to cut off the connection, and that is exactly what he did. Jon took several haggard breaths, and he felt like he had run across the entire countryside. His throat was dry, and he had the urge to drink something to alleviate that itch. He pushed himself up, using Longclaw as a crutch, but he felt his body go rigid all of a sudden. Once again, his consciousness split from his body. The veil of darkness was blotted out, and instead he found himself standing on top of a building with the morning sun glaring down at him. His eyes widened as he took sight of a wide, sprawled-out city with a gigantic pyramid almost touching the clouds. He saw Rhaegal flying right over his head and was heading westward. He felt someone move behind his back, and he quickly turned to face an old man in black robes. "I guess congratulations are in order. You are the first person in history to successfully warg into a dragon. Forgive me for not introducing myself. I am Brynden Rivers, and I go by the name of the Three-Eyed Raven," said Brynden as he walked closer to the edge of the building and observed Rhaegal flying away despite the screeches from Viserion. "How did you? I am a green seer, and I do have the power to tap into your mind as well as all minds of living creatures in the world. You are also a green seer, a recently awakened gift, I'm afraid, but you are handling it better than your cousin," said Brynden as he faced Brynden, as he faced Jon and sat down slowly on the edge of the building. "Bran is with you?" Jon asked to confirm what he knew from the timeline, because even with everything that was happening, he can't expect everything to go just as in the shows. Already a huge divergence was made by his own actions. The ramifications of his actions are unknown at this point. Besides, he felt that the show's of course, the character knows about him from it being fiction in his world. Okay. Besides, he felt that the shows bungled up the entire timeline by making people appear through wormholes or something. The prevailing theory was Westeros and Essos were riddled with wormholes that somehow transported people hundreds of miles in a second. I'm definitely going to be fixing this grammar because it is wild. Fear not, Darren. Your cousin is safe with me, and in time he will reach you unharmed. Don't call me by that name. Who are you? How do you know that name? Why am I here?" Jon asked warily, not to let his true knowledge show to Brynden just in case the guy was hostile. "If you prefer Jon Snow, then that is what I shall call you. I once had a brother by the name of Darren Jon Snow. I am Brynden Rivers, bastard son of Aegon IV and brother to King Darren II. I know your name because I watched you while you were born, and I watched you as you grew up to where you stand. As for why I am here, it is to meet you in person and to help you in any way I can. You and your cousin Brandon are the only two people who have awakened the gift of green sight. Other than me in centuries, your power will be sorely needed in the coming long night. So you know about the others. Where are you, and where is Bran?" Jon asked. "I know about the others, and I'm training young Bran to fully control his gifts. I'm sorry to say that I won't be able to help you as much as I wish. Besides, you will have a role to play in uniting Westeros when the time comes. But I came here to offer my limited time to train you, as well as to hand over something to you. In your hands it will find a better use. and with that Brendan began to show him a memory. When John came out of the memory, he was kneeling before the weirwood tree. He rubbed his forehead as a small headache was taking root. Before it was getting worse, he decided to do what he had to do and find the little gift Brendan had left not far from the weirwood tree. He was going to find Dark's sister, and that would make his claim more strong. Then again, he was still queasy about declaring his legitimacy, because that was going to be an uphill battle with a lot of downsides as well. Whatever the case may be, he was not going to say no to an extra Valyrian steel blade. Peter Baelish watched on sardonically at Robin Arryn's shoddy attempts at archery. He glanced sideways at Lord Royce, and he was amused to note that the Lord of Runestone was trying in vain to conceal the disappointment at the martial powers of the future Lord of the Vale. Personally, he considered it something to celebrate, seeing as his ward has managed to at least move his arrow from one point to another. He was very fortunate that Robin Arryn inherited more of his airheaded mother than his father. It just made his plans much simpler, and consequently, it also kept the boy alive. So long as the boy was easy to manipulate, he was quite happy to leave sweet Robin to his distorted and sickly existence. Peter was interrupted in his musings as one of his men came to him and handed over a roll of parchment. As he read the contents of the parchment, his eyes twinkled in excitement as yet again one of his plans came to fruition. His gamble had paid off, and Sansa had successfully escaped Winterfell as Stannis Baratheon attacked Winterfell. The good news was that Stannis is dead, removing another of his potential enemies from the board, leaving the Boltons an easy pick. There is dissent among the northern lords, and it is time to make his move and take the north along with his lovely Sansa. True, she might have suffered, but it was from suffering people find strength. Peter himself was born out of the suffering of a lovesick boy that was spurned in favor of a political match with a great house by his true love. Decades after that incident, Peter stood at the top while House Tully and House Stark were wiped out. Now it was his time, and he was going to celebrate his total hold over the Vale, North and Riverlands, soon enough with Catelyn's daughter. While Sansa was not pure in the body, he wouldn't mind that much. After all, he had ensured her mind would always be his as he trained her to think a certain way. For him, that was the ultimate ownership, and he was eager to meet his investment. It was time for the Knights of the Vale to take the north, and for him and his new bride. He was really looking forward to seeing Sansa once again, and with that happy thought, he addressed Robin Arryn and subtly led the boy and those around him to what Peter wanted. Chapter 2. The First Move. John weaved his sword around him in quick strokes and swipes, using his wrist to twist and turn the two Valyrian steel swords. He found that he was not very good with using dual swords for his previously aggressive style, but when he delegated one sword for defense, while the other for attack, his moves flowed smoothly like water. Even with that small breakthrough in the new style he was developing, he knew the best way to wield dual swords was by switching the roles of his sword hands alternatively in a fight. It was the best way to keep an enemy and keep the opponent guessing, and unlike the usual styles the Westerosi knights used, speed and precision was the key for dual wielding. He was barely scratching the surface at this point, but taking up a new hobby somewhat helped to keep his mind engaged. Not to mention he was preparing for the wars to come. While he did have the same instincts and muscle memory before his death, he felt the change in style was more than welcome, especially considering the wars that are yet to come. Wow. Speaking of wars, he has been communicating with Rhaegal every now and then. Now that he knew that what the dragon was capable of, he could shield his mind properly from Rhaegal's influence by controlling his own memories. He found that pushing music into their psychic bond was the best way to distract the dragon. Rhaegal was very fond of songs, and that kept the green dragon happy enough to follow the chart he was setting up for the dragon. Right now, Rhaegal was out of Slaver's Bay and taking a rest on the edge of the Painted Mountains. The plan was for Rhaegal to fly over the Dothraki Sea, straight for Andalos. From there, the dragon would reach the Braavosi coastlands. Then Rhaegal would have to cross the narrow sea to the mountains of the Vale. Then Rhaegal will have to fly over the Fingers, and finally he will arrive at Ramsgate. This was the rough plan Jon had come up with, and he knew that speaking of it was simple, but accomplishing what amounted to an intercontinental flight was going to be really tough and slow. Using Rhaegal against the Boltons was his plan B, and plan A relied on something much more complicated. He was training himself for that plan, as he was not going to let Ramsay Snow kill Rickon. The North needs a Stark to really around. Oh. And Jon had ambitions in the South rather than be pinned down at Winterfell. Jon continued to train for a few more minutes before he decided to call it a day. He then decided to train with his warging powers a bit, while he was doing very much a good job at taking partial control of Rhaegal. By Bryndon's admissions, the possibilities of his warging powers were endless. According to Bryndon, the fact that Jon could work partially with Rhaegal, even with the aid of weirwood trees, was a sign of his working powers. Bryndon attributed the increase in power to the way that Jon was resurrected from death and the exposure his blood had with such a phenomenon. Whatever the cause may be, he was not going to complain about the power boost he received. Jon sat down on the ground and took a deep breath and pushed out his consciousness from his body. Without the weirwood trees to amplify and focus his power, he felt like he was floating in a strong wind, but thankfully he managed to latch onto a raven not far from his position. His vision slowly cleared, and now he could see through the raven's eyes. "Fly," Jon commanded, and the raven flew from the branch of the tree. He directed the raven further south, and it was then he encountered another raven. Just as Bryndon instructed, he tried to split his consciousness that was already embedded in the first raven, and it latched into the second raven. The raven wobbled for a time, but almost crashed into a tree. But before that happened, Jon managed to gain full control, and the raven joined the other in the air. Similarly, he tried this with more birds until its concentration broke into 5. 5 is not a bad number, but I can do better, Jon said to himself before he once again warged. After some time, he grew tired of warging and stopped altogether. Bryndon had warned him that repeatedly warging may cause serious problems to one's mental fortitude. That was the last thing Jon needed, so he took some much needed rest. It says break. Woof. That doesn't mean that he was going to stay idle. Rather than waste his time, he went straight to find Sir Davos. He found the man watching the Brothers of the Night's Watch in the courtyard of Castle Black. As Jon had approached the former hand of King Stannis, he noted that Melisandre was observing them both from the opposite end of the courtyard. "I thought you were traveling south, Jon?" Sir Davos asked as he leaned on the railing. "Aye, but only with an army, which is why I have come to you," asked Jon, as he joined Davos to observe his former brother's train. Hello, new viewer. I hope you're enjoying it. We're reading a fan fiction from A Song of Ice and Fire. Alright, well, you have come to the wrong person, lad. As you can see, I have no army, and the only one I marched with was broken by the Boltons. Davos shrugged, but looked at Jon questioningly. "You may not have an army, Sir Davos, but you do have ships docked on Eastwatch. They are still docked in the bay, and if they follow you, I would like to use them," said Jon, and waited for Davos to answer. "I thought with Stannis dead, the fleet would have sailed back to Dragonstone," Davos asked in surprise. It's more of a statement. But how will they know about King Stannis when they are isolated at Eastwatch? So far, no ravens have flown from Castle Black since Maester Aemon has passed. How would he know that? Maester Aemon... Oh, well, I guess they're following the show's plot. Okay. Let's see here. In the absence of King Stannis, will they follow your command? Jon asked, and Davos was silent for some time as the smuggler-turned-knight contemplated. "I might be able to convince some of them, but I'm telling you, it won't be much. I really hate to say this, but most of the men in the fleet are fanatics, and they would listen more to the Red Woman than me," said Davos as he glared at Melisandre, who was slowly making her way over to them by climbing the steps. "My lady," Jon said and nodded in her direction, seeing as he knew that she will be very useful in the coming campaign, as well as what was about to follow. "You have changed, Jon Snow. Before, I could barely feel your presence, but now it is almost as if looking into a bright lone star in the night sky. The Lord has given his blessing to you once you return from the other side," said Melisandre, as she walked around Jon Snow in a circle, observing him to the ire of Davos, who was grinding his teeth quite hardly. Jon had the distinct impression that Davos picked up that habit from Stannis. "I do not know about any gods, my lady. There was nothing on the other end when I died," There were no old gods, the drowned god, the seven gods, or even the red god. I do not claim to be well versed in divine matters, but I think the gods would not care that what we mortals do in this world. If we have to do something, then it has to be done with our own two hands rather than depend on any gods, said John, who still remained a skeptic even after what happened. As far as he was concerned, he would believe any god when said god was standing right in front of him. Till that day, he would not believe in them. Even when he was before the weirwood trees, he knew there were no gods watching over, but the trees do give off some level of comfort, and they enhance his power, which was a win-win. Even when you do not believe, the Lord watches over us, Jon Snow. Why do you think the Lord brought you back? You have a part to play in the great war that is coming, Jon Snow. You are the prince that was promised, said Melisandre, and Jon could see that Davos was about to come up with a clever retort. Before that had happened, Jon walked over to Davos. Jon talked over Davos. We all need to work together if we are to fight the walkers. I do not know about the gods, but I know we need more men than the Night's Watch or the Free Folk can field. We need more than the North to even stand a chance against the Night King. He has 100,000 men marching in his army, probably more if we consider all the dead beasts north of the wall. We need the army of the Seven Kingdoms to stand a chance at first, but first we need the North. So long as the Boltons rule from Winterfell, the Northern Lords will never unite under their banners. The only way I can do that is with the wildlings as well as the support of the other northern houses. Marching through winter all the way from the wall is suicide, but with the fleet at Eastwatch, that won't be necessary. I was hoping you and Sir Davos might be able to convince the captains of the ship to transport the army to White Harbor when the time comes. Melisandre exchanged a hesitant look with Davos, but in the end she nodded, which made Jon let out a silent sigh of relief. If we are going to do this, we need to ride today itself, said Davos, staring at Melisandre meaningly. I will be ready, Sir Davos. Melisandre nodded carefully. I know you do not have to do this, but thank you, Sir Davos, Jon quickly added before Davos walked away. It is as you said. No one can hide from this war, and I have my part to play in some small way. Then I will, said Davos, and with a nod, he was on his way to prepare for the journey. I suspect you have something to ask of me, Jon Snow. Do ask what you desire, and if it is within my power, then I shall help in any way I can, said Melisandre, who was now facing Jon completely, and he was giving her undivided attention. I have a plan to deal with one of the most dangerous enemies that I have, and I need your help in striking the killing blow, so to speak. I shall explain my plan, but you only need to agree if you are comfortable with my plan. What do you say? Jon asked, and he was not surprised by Melisandre's enthusiastic nod. So Jon began to explain his plan in detail. It only took less than 1 hour for Sir Davos to arrange the horses and the necessary provisions. It was going to take at least 2 days for them to ride to Eastwatch, and that was all the time he needed to convince the Free Folk. Jon had to make sure that he had the support of the Free Folk. Let's see. I lost my thought. Before Sansa arrives, which was going to be sooner rather than later, as he observed Sansa and her 2 companions via the weirwood trees. They were closing in on Castle Black, and that made Jon accelerate his plans. Jon took a horse and rode out of Castle Black for the gift to speak with the leaders of the Free Folk. As he rode into the camp the Free Folk had managed to raise together, he was greeted with some respectful nods, and in the extreme case, with a disinterested frown. As far as first impressions go, Jon thought he was doing fine. When he saw Tormund, he stopped his horse and dismounted quickly. I was about to visit you myself, said Tormund, who is a way of greeting. For what? Jon asked curiously. Some of the men saw the Southerners scouting out our camps at night. Know anything about that? Tormund asked, and the news made Jon perk up. He had not known that there were scouts this far north, but he should have guessed. Most probably from House Umber, and that's the reason I am here as well. But if we are going to do this, I need to speak with all of your leaders, said Jon to a surprised Tormund, but the giant of the man agreed without any protest. A few minutes later, Jon was standing with a group of Free Folk around a vastly lit fire, even as the snow fell around them. The scouts that your people encountered were from House Umber, They have a lot of grievances against the free folk, and that makes them a dangerous enemy. Already they have joined with the Boltons and Karstarks, and they are planning to march here to slaughter every last one of us, said John. And the various leaders of the clans let out a string of curses. John decided to plow ahead before the situation got out of hand. I had hoped that Stannis would be able to defeat the Boltons and unite the Northern Lords. If that had happened, then Stannis would have ensured that we would be safe here, as he believed that the threat to the north was real. With the Boltons in power, that is not the case. They will attack and slaughter all of us unless... John trailed off as he exchanged a worried glance with Tormund. Unless we destroy the Boltons first. He wants us to fight the Boltons in the south, said Tormund with a hard stare, and John was for a moment filled with doubt, but he speared on, regardless of the consequences. That's an interesting description. I know this is not the deal that we made. I shouldn't be asking you to fight, but if we don't strike now, we will never again have the chance. Other northern houses will not declare for the Boltons for now, but if we wait too long, we will force other reluctant houses to march. They will force other reluctant houses to march on the wall. If that happens, we will be dead, or worse, well before the others get past the wall, said John, and the free folk leaders muttered amongst themselves. There are more than 100,000 free folk when we followed Mance, and look at us now. If we fight this battle, what will become of the rest of us? Dalba skeptically asked. And John really did understand their concerns. His eyes found Wun-Wun, the only surviving giant among the free folk. It is a pity that the giants will die out with Wun-Wun unless nature stepped in and restored the balance. The same was true for the free folk, who would be risking everything to fight for him in Winterfell. At least that was their thought, and John was not going to divulge his plans, despite such a morbid thought before them, because he knew that at the end of the day, fortune will favor him, and it did in the form of Tormund. The giant of a man pointed straight at Jon Snow and said, "He spoke for us when no one else would in Castle Black. He died for us, and if we are not ready to do the same for him, then we are cowards. If this battle is ours, our last one, then so be it. Better to die than a coward." Tormund growled fiercely, and that left the free folk in an awkward silence. But that was broken when Wun-Wun stood up. "Snow." Wun-Wun nodded, and that was the final nail, so to speak. Jon now possessed the army he needed, but had one more thing to do. "I need some 30 good men to be ready by tomorrow evening." "What do you need them for?" Tormund asked curiously. "I'm going to take a castle." Jon responded briefly, but refused to explain further, and in that exact moment, Sansa, Brienne of Tarth, and Podrick Payne slowly trotted into the camp upon their horses. Upon seeing Jon, Sansa jumped down from her horse and ran to his arms, hiding her fiery hair in his wide chest. Jon could feel the relieved sobs let out by his cousin, and he vowed that Ramsay would suffer, and all the northern lords that stood back and watched from the sidelines would be put in their place for good. If there was one thing he hated more in this world than the previous world, that was a rapist and all those silent accomplices. Sansa Stark stared at the crackling fire, reminiscing about her life in Winterfell before she stupidly went south. She was really a stupid little girl back then, and she was cruel as well to her siblings, especially Arya and Jon. Looking back on her life, all she had was a regret. She had a beautiful and loving family, but her selfishness and stupidity destroyed her entire family. If only she had not tattled aloft to the queen about her father's plans, then she would still have had her family. A shiver came to her right hand at the thought that she was responsible for her father's death. It was as if she had swung the sword instead of ill in pain outside of the Sept of Baelor. From there on, she was beaten, humiliated, sold off like a broodmare, abused, tormented, and raped. It was then that she truly understood her father's lessons. When winter comes, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. The true meaning had always been to depend and trust only her family, but she never held her family in high regard. And that was why she felt nothing when she sold out her father to Cersei Lannister. When she betrayed her father, she betrayed the entire pack. And now look at the state of House Stark. Robb and her mother, murdered by the sworn bannermen of House Stark. Bran and Rickon, nowhere to be found. But she hoped they were here at the wall. But seeing as she had seen neither, nor heard, He had neither seen nor heard of them from John, so far reignited her fears once more. Arya was nowhere to be found, but according to Lady Brienne, her little sister was traveling with the Hound. The only sibling she could turn to for protection was sitting right beside her, rubbing soothing circles on her back, like her father used to do when she was upset or angry. She leaned into John and almost like a little girl all over again, feeling home. She couldn't control the tears that slipped past her eyes at the thought of home. She didn't deserve a home. She didn't deserve John, a brother that she hardly knew because of her own stupid prejudices. Sansa had grown up learning about how bastards were sinful creatures, but Septa Mordane was wrong. Her mother was wrong, and the 7 gods were wrong. All of them were wrong, because when she looked at John, all she could see was someone who would do anything to protect her. He was her brother, and she was his sister. Now she knew the value of family, and that bonds that would last through the ages relied on family. No one else could be trusted, and she could have avoided all that had happened if only she was like Arya. She hiccuped lightly at the thought of wanting to be more like her younger sister Arya. "What's the matter, Sansa?" John said, and his smooth voice pulled her out of the depressing hole she was digging herself into. "Nothing. I was just thinking about how I would prefer to be like Arya." Sansa laughed awkwardly as she discreetly rubbed her eyes so that John wouldn't see her tears. "So what? You want to hound me to teach you how to fight with a sword, fire arrows, and fight in epic battles?" John asked with a laugh, and Sansa couldn't help but join. There were a few things she could laugh about in her life, and all of that was about her family. It was a testament to how much she suffered when she lost her family. "Well, I wouldn't know how to fight, but I would settle for being a decent sister at least. I should have been like Arya and treated you better, but I was horrible to you and to her." "You were a child, Sansa. I have never felt that you treated me or Arya horribly," said John, and Sansa threw him an incredulous look. "Well, maybe you could have been a little kinder to Arya, but you never treated me horribly. The fondest memories I have are of Winterfell with you, Arya, Bran, Rickon, and Robb." "No matter what, I wouldn't change anything from our childhood," said John with a happy smile, and Sansa really wondered how her brother could possibly be happy of their shared childhood. She could still remember the subtle ways she and her mother snubbed John. She could still hear the sharp insults Septa Mordane would unleash on John, even when he was present. Don't look so surprised, sister. The last few years at the Wall had taught me to appreciate how blessed I was compared to less fortunate people. At the very least, I had full bellies, even in the harshest of winters. Many of my sworn brothers never had seen a decent meal in their entire life. Compared to that, my woes are minuscule and inane," said John, and Sansa marveled at how changed her brother had become in the years after he left for the Wall. "If I had a chance, I would have changed much. For one, I would have been a better sister to you, and don't lie to make me comfortable, John. I was horrible to you and Arya. I belittled everything about the North, and never truly grasped Father's lesson about the Pack. I betrayed." Sansa clamped her mouth shut instantly as she almost spilled her biggest secret. She bit the inside of her lip, and she could feel the coppery taste of her own blood. She had broken out of her stupor when John wrapped his hands around her and hugged her closely. "You don't have to say anything, Sansa. I know what you speak of, and you shouldn't blame yourself. Even if you hadn't told Cersei Lannister about Father's plans, she would have known one way or another. He was already being watched by 3 sets of spies, and at the time Cersei was not his biggest enemy," said John, and she stiffened in fright. How? How could John know about that? She never told anyone about that. This ever. Sansa was now afraid, and she felt as if a block of ice was forming in her stomach. "You don't have to be afraid, Sansa. You were a little girl only taught to sew, sing songs, and dance. Courtly politics were way above your head at the age and time. Father shouldn't have taken you to King's Landing. Or Arya, for that matter. Besides, he wouldn't have judged you for what you think you did, Sansa. He loved us all too much, even more than even his honor. After all, he confessed to all those false crimes on the steps of the Sept of Baelor for your sake. He had hoped that you would be kept safe, and he would lose his head over and over again if it means that you or any one of us will remain safe. So forgive yourself, Sansa, and be the wolf the Starks are and always have been. Kill the girl that you were and be the woman that you were always meant to be. Be a Stark of Winterfell, said Jon. And she didn't know why, but her fears and worries fled in his warm embrace. After many long years, she felt like she was a true Stark again. She had so many questions swimming in her mind, but it meant a lot to her to have Jon's forgiveness. For a long time, Sansa remained in her brother's embrace, but after she regained a modicum of stability, she slowly pulled back to stare into his gray eyes. She absently noted that his eyes had become darker. How did you know all of this? Sansa asked curiously, to know how her brother, who was at the wall, knew so much about what had happened in King's Landing. It is a long story, and most of it is a sad tale. Jon smiled forlornly, and for a moment Sansa could see the pain in her brother's eyes. She wondered what could make her brother experience pain like that. I have all the time I need to hear that tale, said Sansa, placing her hands in her brother's hands. Jon huffed out a laugh at the face she made and began to narrate the tale. Throughout the night, Sansa stayed awake, captured by the tale of her brother's exploits. Tyrion Lannister paced back and forth in the council chambers of his new sworn queen, Daenerys Targaryen. If someone had said that he would be serving a Targaryen queen back when he was in King's Landing, he would have scoffed and perhaps even graced them with a few choice words. By now, he was serving a Targaryen queen and Meereen as her advisor. When Varys told him about a queen in the east who was supposedly the last best chance for a stable ruler to sit on the Iron Throne, he was intrigued. That intrigue led him through a thrilling adventure through the ruins of Valyria, all the way to Meereen. He had thoughts about writing a book describing his adventures, but he rather doubted anyone would read it, seeing as it was written by a kinslayer dwarf. His failings at being an accomplished writer aside, he was having a bad day. The queen had disappeared from the city in the wake of an attack from the Sons of the Harpy. That itself had put the city of Meereen under considerable stress. Then the absence was not ignored by the slavers. According to Varys, the slavers of Volantis, Astapor, Yunkai, and other slave cities had pooled in their resources to unleash revolts against the queen's rule. Matters were not helped when the former slaves were left with no other new prospects. It seems Queen Daenerys had no solution to replace the institution of slavery with something else. And while that was a serious lapse of judgment on the Dragon Queen's part, Tyrion had managed to achieve some mixed success in that area. The Red Priests of the city were of a great help in providing people with some much-needed direction to take on in life. He had even managed to employ several former slaves in the city in small construction projects within the pyramid. He was slowly expanding the fleets of Meereen for eventually sailing the Queen's army to Westeros. His latest worries came not just from the Sons of the Harpy, but from the dragon Rhaegal. It had been 2 days since the Green Dragon escaped from the prison Queen Daenerys had chained it in. Tyrion, as well as all the inhabitants of the Great Period, had shaken awake that night when Rhaegal destroyed its prison and flew away. When the Queen returns, Tyrion had no idea how he was going to break that news, and the fact that he was the one that had chained them from her captivity was a point against him. Thankfully, the other dragon, Viserion, was of the sensible sort, and was staying in Meereen. The dragon did occasionally fly out of the pyramid, but so far no incidents had been reported, and that was the only relief Tyrion was enjoying so far. There we go. He stopped his pacing at the council as Missandei and Grey Worm walked into the council chambers. He decided not to waste any time and got straight to the matter at hand. Is there any word about Rhaegal? Tyrion asked, hoping against hope there was some sight of that blasted dragon. He really did deserve a punch to the face for the stunt he pulled. You shouldn't have removed... A fisherman reported seeing the green dragon flying in the direction of the Painted Mountains. With the streets getting dangerous for the citizens, the Unsullied have to regularly patrol the streets. I cannot spare men to track the dragon, and even if we do, what are we supposed to do? Said Grey Worm, who glared at Tyrion, who wisely didn't antagonize the captain of the Unsullied. You shouldn't have removed the chains from the dragon in the first place. Her grace put them in chains for a reason, and now you have freed one of them to the open sky. Rhaegal could be anywhere, but when the queen returns, you will inform her yourself, said Missandei, and Tyrion was horrified to note that Grey Worm was also nodding along. Please don't be like that. We're all on the same side here," said Tyrion, and he tried to give a welcoming smile, but it sort of fell apart into a grimace. "On this matter, you are on your own side, Lord Tyrion. Her Grace sees the dragons as her children, and you are the one who is responsible for her missing child." "We have no part in this debacle," said Missandei as she walked out of the council chambers, closely followed by Grey Worm. "It seemed you have bungled up, my friend," said Varys as he walked into the council chambers, startling Tyrion, who was in the process of pouring himself a glass of wine. He caught himself quickly and poured one more glass of wine and handed it to Varys. "Tell me about it. I seem to have suddenly struck a stroke of misfortune, my friend," said Tyrion as he plopped himself into a plush seat with a huff and quickly began to drain his wineglass despite the disapproving stare of Varys. "My little birds will be listening to any whispers regarding dragons, my friend, although I hope you have taken necessary steps to ensure the third dragon does not leave Meereen," Varys warned, even as he took small sips from the wineglass. "Even their mother can't control them. How do you expect me to suddenly be an expert kennel master of dragons?" Tyrion moaned as he hid his face behind his palms. "I implore you to devise some way, my friend. I worry for your pea-sized head when the Queen realizes that you set one of her dragons loose upon the world. I will be keeping my attention on Volantis, as there are some interesting whispers coming from the daughter of Valyria," said Varys, as he placed his half-finished glass of wine on the table and gave Tyrion an assessing stare before he took his leave. Tyrion let out a disappointing huff and thought about how to force a dragon to stay. Physical force was out of the question, and he was not drunk enough to attempt that folly. The only path he could see was to somehow make Viserion interested and entertained beneath the pyramid. But the real dilemma was, what was it that dragons would find interesting enough to stay cooped up in a dark dungeon? He was sure there was some answer, but perhaps the dragon could get drunk on wine. It had worked out well for himself, so he didn't see why it wouldn't work on dragons. "I'm going to need a lot more wine than this, for sure," Tyrion grumbled as he shook the small jar of wine and again poured himself a cup. "All right, we will be starting Chapter 3 in just a second, but I am feeling the effects of having my morning tea, so I'm going to take a quick little break to use the restroom, maybe grab a glass of water, and I will be right back, and we will continue on with our read. I hope you are enjoying it. We are at the hour mark here, and I will be right back in just a little bit." Alright, and we're back. I have a sandwich, I have water, and I'm ready to get back to reading. Alright. Let's take one quick bite of my sandwich. Or three. Alright. I'm gonna get a napkin real quick. Alright, let's get back at this. Let's see. Alright, here we go. Chapter 3. Winter is coming. John, along with Tormund and some of the free folk warriors, were waiting patiently under the cover of darkness graciously provided by the thick trees a few miles out from the gift. John once again took a peek from behind the tree he was hiding behind and saw a few guards standing vigil in the outer walls of the last hearth. The only reason he could see them clearly was because of the burning torch the guard was staying close to. It was a foolish mistake, but in this heavy snow, it was understandable to be as warm as possible. Unfortunately, it would be the guard's last mistake. John nodded to Tormund, and the unofficial leader of the Free Folk took 15 men with him and moved farther left from their current position. John concentrated, and a few owls he had warged into flew from the trees to settle inside the walls of Last Hearth. Unlike normal castles, Last Hearth has weak walls, especially considering the wall was made of wood rather than stone. You didn't probably know you were getting a mukbang, too. After making sure the castle was unguarded and most of the guards were asleep, John decided to start. Aim above their neck, John ordered 2 of his archers, and they carefully took aim and let the arrows fly. The first arrow found its mark on one of the guards' throats. The other found another guard's eye and was killed immediately. Tormund's men were not idle as the 2 archers from their company stepped forward and fired their own arrows. Both found their mark on the 2 men upon a watchtower. John signaled to pause and pulled back as a group of 5 umbermen with 2 hounds came from around the castle wall. If they find the dead men, then a fight will break out, which will take out John's advantage. Without wasting any time, he warged into the hounds and led the 2 archers with him further right, closer to the position of the patrolling guards. As the guards came into John's immediate line of sight, he made the hounds turn on their masters. For a brief moment of surprise was enough for 2 arrows to find their mark, while the hounds tore out the flesh of the hands of the 2 guards. Just as they let out a scream, 2 arrows silenced them. The last guard who tried to make a run for his life didn't get far as Ghost's jaw clamped down. On the guard's throat. In a shower of blood, the last guard fell, and the night was silent once again. John once again observed the castles through the owls inside and noticed a few guards were stepping outside of the castle because they probably heard some of the screams. Doesn't matter because they won't be able to do much in the next few minutes. John nodded to the men, and they carried a long enough wooden pole that they had managed to scourge off from the forest near Last Hearth. It was not much of a ladder, but using a scythe they had managed to carve out some grooves. The makeshift ladder was carefully set upon the ground, and slowly the other end touched the top of the wall. One of the men tied a rope around his leg and started climbing using the rope to lock into the grooves. As the man made it to the top, he waited for John's instructions. John was observing the Umber guards who had returned to their posts, probably thinking they had imagined the scream. John gave the signal, and the man climbed over the wall and ran straight to the guard watchtower and tied the rope he was carrying. He threw the other end of the rope down, and one by one the free folk climbed over the wall, as did John. If John was being pragmatic, he really had to thank the Red Wedding for cutting down the bulk of the Northern Army, as House Umber had also suffered some significant losses. That was the only reason why the men in the ancestral home of Umbers were this few in number. If the Red Wedding hadn't have happened, then John wouldn't be forced to do this as well, which made his earlier point moot. One by one they silently climbed down, using the ropes. John signaled them to pause, and he sent the owls into the castle. The winged creatures glided through the open corridors without making much sound. Even still, the flapping of the wings did wake some of the guards, but they went back to sleep once they saw that it was just some owl. John gave the signal, and once again their group split into two, each following John and Tormund respectively. While Tormund took the east corridor that led to the library and quarters of the Umber Guards, John took one that led to the Lord's quarters and the Ravenry. John walked forward. The men who followed began to slice the throats of the guards one by one. Soon the castle was filled with screams as the free folk cut a bloody swath through the ancestral home of the Umbers. While this happened, John walked through the corridor, feeling not a shred of guilt at the amount of blood he was spilling. Most of the men dying around him probably had no part in what small John Umber's treachery. Wrong character guy. But dealing with this men was not about revenge or justice. But to truly make that statement strong, a lot of death is needed, even if a majority of them were innocents. It was a necessary act because that was the only way John could establish his power base, and that's why John had no qualms stabbing an unarmed man straight through his abdomen. He didn't wait for the guy to properly grasp what was happening before he pushed him away with Longclaw and sliced the head clean off from a wounded soldier nearby. Spread out and kill anyone that looks remotely like a threat, but do not burn anything or rape any women. If you do, be prepared to be short of a head, and that will be the least of your worries, John ordered, and continued to fight his way to the Lord's quarters. Already they had secured the Ravenry from the Maester, and with the old man knocked out, no ravens will be sent from the castle. Would be sent. John continued to advance, and more Umber men were cut down. Finally, they reached the Lord's quarters, but found them to be empty. John immediately warged into the owls, and he knew where his target was. 2 of you follow me, John ordered, and immediately rushed through a small pathway and jumped through a window, closely followed by 2 of his men. But his eyes... They landed in an open courtyard on the west side of the castle, and John could see a few guards trying to open the gates. But his eyes locked on a small figure on a horse, surrounded by 2 large, bulky men. The two men who followed John into the courtyard were archers, and they immediately dispatched the men trying to unlock the gate. The fully awakened castle was by now filled with screaming women and children as their men were being slaughtered without mercy. I suspect you are Moors Umber and Hother Umber, along with Ned Umber. Surrender now or watch your people suffer the consequences, John demanded. By the time the free folk dispatched... That right there. There we go. Better than nothing. John demanded, and by the time the free folk had dispatched the Umber guards for good, and only two of them were left who were protecting Ned Umber with Moors and Hother. You are Jon Snow, aren't you? Consorting with wildlings. Your ancestors will be rolling in their graves, boy, and we Umbers will never surrender to wildlings. Moors barked in rage as he unsheathed his blade, but John stayed the hands of the archers. Maybe, but that's my decision, and if you have such strong problems with me, you should take it out with me. You should have taken it out with me. Instead, you broke guest rights and handed over Rickon Stark to the flayed man. I believe your ancestors will be rolling in their graves too. House Stark is dead. You, Starks, have destroyed the North with your foolishness, Hother Umber screamed while glaring hatefully at the free folk warriors. John had heard rumors of a daughter of Hother Umber was taken in a wildling raid, and the hate that he could see in the Castellan of Last Hearth proved this to be true. But John didn't have the luxury to sympathize with his enemies, so he decided to end the battle for Last Hearth for good. So long as I am breathing and my sisters are breathing, House Stark is not dead, but House Umber, on the other hand, is going to die by my hands. John sneered and unsheathed Dark Sister from his back. Armed with two swords, he moved forward while the free folk and much of the remaining inhabitants of Last Hearth watched on. The two guards that were standing beside the Umbers were for the first to charge forward on their horses. John ducked from their swords while he stabbed Dark Sister through the back of one of the guards. The man screamed in pain and fell off of his horse, and after a century, Dark Sister finally tasted blood once again. The other guard screamed in rage, and he began to hack and swipe wildly atop the horse. John easily parried a wide blow with Longclaw, and that left the guard exposed, which John used to stab the guard straight through his stomach. The guard fell from his horse, slowly bleeding to death on the ground. John kicked away the swords, which was not a surprise attack. John kicked away the swords, not to get a surprise attack, just in case the guards were bold enough to try for one. With the last two Umber guards dead, John gave his undivided attention to the three Umbers. I would have thought both of you to join the traitor in Winterfell, John commented as he spun Dark Sister in his left hand and held it in a backhanded grip while he positioned Long Claw in his right, ready to spill the blood of the Umbers. Moors and Hother, which number clambered down from their horses and charged at John with their swords. John parried a swipe from Moors while ducking another from Hother and positioned himself right in the middle of the two brothers, and from there John weaved his sword expertly in fluid motions, keeping the Umber brothers at bay with the speed of his attacks. The Valyrian steel blade sung as it cut through the air, expertly blocking and parrying the blows from the Umbers. John blocked a jab from Moors, and he quickly knelt and spun at his knee. The long claw flashed, and in a shower of blood, Hother was cut down at his knees. On his right leg was clearly separated. Moors wailed as his brother fell and increased his power to his swings in his rage. John slowly moved back, blocking each blow with Dark Sister, and quickly he turned the tables by stepping in closer and plunging Dark Sister straight through the neck of Moors, while he used Longclaw to block the strike from the elderly Umber. The switching of defense by John had taken Moors completely by surprise, and the large, burly man fell on his knees. John kicked Moors in the chest, and the man fell on his back, staring vacantly into the night sky. John slowly turned to see Hother sobbing at the death of his brother, but the giant of the man clinged to his single knee, staring defiantly at John. You and your wildlings will die, you bastard. Hawthor could not complete his sentence as John cut his head off with Longclaw in one single swipe. The headless corpse fell in slow motion, and with it, when it fell, Last Hearth remained eerily silent except for Ned Umber, who was sobbing upon his horse at the fate of his family. Well met, Lord Umber. I'm sure you will find me quite likable, and so will your brother soon enough. John smirked, and the free folk took the boy down from his horse and bound him in ropes. The chained man you spoke of, John. Tormund pushed the old maester forward, and John noted that outside a few scratches on his cheeks, the maester was unharmed. What is your name, maester? John asked as he cleaned the blood on his blades, using the cloak of Moor's Umber. Vormer, my lord. What will you do with Ned? He's just a boy. Please don't harm him for his brother's mistake. I pleaded with Lord Umber to not break guest rights, but he was blinded by his rage and his loss. Ned Umber will not be unharmed so long as Rickon Stark remains unharmed. Now I have some questions for you, maester, and I implore you to answer truthfully. Can you do that? John asked, and at the reluctant nod of the old maester, he plowed on. So how many men have joined with the Boltons? 200 men, my lord. There are at least 50 men in this castle. Were they supposed to stay here, or were they intended to join the Boltons in Winterfell? John asked, and he could see the maester was reluctant to divulge that piece of information. I would like to remind you that your vows are to this castle, and like it or not, this castle is fallen to me. That means I am the acting lord of Last Hearth. Answer me truthfully, Maester Vormer. The men were supposed to join a host of Karstark men and marched on Winterfell to join forces with Lord Bolton. Lord Vormer said quickly, which made John a little suspicious. Why would Umbers and Karstarks delay their march and do it separately? Why the delay? And why didn't everyone march on Winterfell right away? John asked curiously. The bulk of the Karstark and Umber men have already marched out, my lord, but the weapons and food are needed to be escorted into Winterfell. The storms delayed the caravan, and that's the reason for the delayed march. John's eyes lit up in understanding, and he silently began to think. He had only come here with 30 men, and on hindsight, it was not a good idea. If he had known this information, he would have brought more men. They would not have been able to strike as quickly as they did, but still, to think that he could have dealt with both the Umbers and the Karstarks, it was a missed opportunity, and he was not that much disappointed. If only I had more time. Time! When will the Karstarks be here, Maester? Asked John, hoping he was blessed with such a stroke of luck. By next week, my lord. It is hoped that the caravan could reach the Lonely Hills by within 2 weeks and continue the journey before more snow sets in, Maester Vormer explained, and that put John at ease because he still had time to call for reinforcements. So who would like to ride all the way back to the gift and lead 40 men here before first light? John asked, and he is exasperated to note the men were looking at each other, clearly not looking forward to riding all the way to the gift in this cold night. Fine. You have to only travel on the first light, John conceded, and he won a volunteer. Now all that was left to do was to ambush the Karstark forces. For the rest of the night, John stayed awake just in case, but his vigilance was for naught, because the night passed without incident. When the first light shined on Last Hearth, he sent a rider to the gift, asking for reinforcements, all while he prepared the trap for the Karstark men. As a first step, he made all of the free folk men shed their clothing in favor of some leather and iron armor from the dead Umber guards. All the bronze weapons of the free folk were replaced with steel swords, steel-tipped arrows and spears, maces and axes. That the dead Umber men were replaced by the free folk disguised as Umber men. Then they began the long wait. The reinforcements that John requested arrived a little earlier than predicted, as the free folk were a hardy bunch, and he equipped them as quickly as he could and described his plan in detail. Merritt had served the Karstarks as long as he could remember. When the children of Lord Karstark were murdered by the Kingslayer, he was there demanding justice from the young wolf. Fat load of good that it did, and the Kingslayer was set free by the Stark boy's own mother. As if that was not enough, the upstart had the gall to cut off the head of Lord Rickard for killing a few Lannisters. He didn't understand why the king was supposedly thinking, after all. The North had assembled to kill the Lannisters in the first place. Why does it matter if the Lannisters were killed in captivity or in battle? The Lannisters had no qualm in killing several of good Northmen in captivity. It was at this point that Merritt, as well as many Karstark men, saw no reason to stick around under the thumb of the foolish boy. So right after Lord Rickard's execution, he had marched the entire Karstark army back to Karhold. A few weeks later, he let out a sigh of relief when he learned about the Red Wedding. On one hand, the Stark boy was dead, and that meant the Karstarks were free from any retribution from the Starks, but the Boltons now controlled the north, at least in name, and Lord Harold became the Lord of Karhold. Lord Harold had great plans, and it involved destroying the Boltons and taking the north from the flayed men. The Karstarks were descended from the Starks, and in absence of a male Stark heir, Winterfell should go to Lord Harold. With Roose Bolton dead, his Lord's ambitions were about to be fulfilled. Would the Bolton's forces fight with the Starks? One will be wiped out, while the other will be weakened. It will be the time Lord Harold will deliver the final blow and take the north from the fool of a bastard. In the end, the Karstarks will rule the north. All of that will come to pass, but first, he had to lead the caravan to Winterfell, and the Umbers will soon join them on their long march to Winterfell. Merritt saw a scout riding hard towards him and realized it was one of his own. "The gates are open, Captain. The Umbers are ready," the scout reported. "Of course they are. To me, men, lest hearth awaits," Merritt ordered, and he led his men straight to the ancestral seat of Umbers. As he rode into the castle, he noted that it was thick with tension. He could feel it in the air, and his instincts were flaring up. Before he could act on it, the men who were stationed on the walls of the castle began to rain down arrows on his men, spreading chaos and death. "To me, men, to me!" Merritt tried to rally the men, but his forces became further disorganized when a large group of men attacked from their rear, boxing them into the gate, trapping his company. He couldn't call for a retreat. That left him only one option, as to fight out of this trap. He cursed as he saw rushing out of the castle. He cursed as he saw men rushing out of the castle, beginning to cut down his own men. He took the head of a man that dared to charge him and resigned himself to fight to the death. He dismounted from his horse and stabbed a man through his abdomen, and was rewarded with a strike to his nose by the dying man. The blow disoriented him, and he was about to slash open the back of another soldier, but something blocked his attack. Even with his blurry vision, he could make out the ripple patterns of a sword and a wolf pommel. All around him, he could make out his men falling in droves, screaming as they died, one after the other. "Jon Snow" were his last words, as he felt a flash of pain on his neck, and he knew no more. When Merritt regained his consciousness, he was very confused. He looked around in wonder as he was once again riding his own horse. Where was the battle? What happened to Last Hearth? Where the hell was he? He was surrounded by men who were holding the banners of the White Sun, but he knew none of them. Then one of them rode alongside him on a horse, and he felt a flash of recognition. "Glad to see you back among the living. Your name is Merritt, right? I was planning on slaughtering you all, but I have a better idea, my dear friend. You are going to help me take Karhold," said Jon Snow. "I would rather die than sell out House Karstark, you bastard." Merritt snarled, and his hand went for his sword, but found none at his hip. "You are loyal to the Karstarks. I respect that, but unfortunately for you, I don't need your permission. I have not tried this yet, but if it is painful for you, then know that it is completely unintentional," said Jon Snow with an apologetic tone. "What are you talking about?" Merritt trailed off as he flinched in fear when the dark gray eyes of Jon Snow turned pearl white, and once again he knew no more. But unlike the last time, he was horrified to note he was not unconscious, but trapped in his own mind. He was not allowed to move, make a sound, or even think. He watched on with growing horror as the guards of Karhold opened the gate and knowingly let the Stark army in, all on his own orders. He was powerless to stop it, and watched as the Starks wreaked havoc inside Karhold. The keep had never fallen from outside attacks in thousands of years, and yet on his watch it had fallen. He wanted to cry, but he was denied even that by the sorcery of Jon Snow. When all was said and done, he watched on helplessly as the ancestral home of the Karstarks was overrun by its enemies. He followed Jon Snow into the quarters of young Alice, and he prayed to the old gods that she had escaped somehow, but it was not to be. "Lady Karstark, it is an honor to meet you in person. I am Jon Snow, and we have a lot to talk about regarding your father." Merritt heard the bastard say, and he couldn't help but wish the smug bastard dead for ruining everything. John observed the brave-faced Alice Karstark, who was projecting, and sighed internally. He knew the Karstarks were wronged terribly by Robb, and frankly he doubted that the bad blood Robb had started would ever go away. Lord Karstark lost 2 sons to Jaime Lannister, and Robb cut his head off for killing 2 Lannister boys. The murder of the Lannister boys was wrong. Robb could have at least punished the man by sending him over to Karhold instead of taking his head. The Karstarks were kin, and when Robb took Lord Karstark's head, he became a kinslayer. The Starks had married into this house for many generations, and many Karstark women had married into Winterfell as well. Now it fell to John to clean up the bad blood between the 2 houses, and it did not help when he had to war with the Karstarks. I do apologize for what happened to your grandfather and brothers. Robb should have never done what he did, and if I was there, I would have stopped him at any cost, stated John, but he was greeted with an unimpressed stare from Alice Karstark. Is that why you are here, Jon Snow? You broke your oaths to the Night Watch and invaded the North with a wildling army behind your back. You killed so many of my people because we decided to stand against the wildlings. I doubt you are here to apologize. If so, a raven would have sufficed. Alice scoffed and stared coldly into his eyes. The Maester of Castle Black is dead, and that means ravens are hard to come by these days, John joked, but he could see that was having no effect on her. She was a Stark, after all. All right, he admitted in the confines of his mind. I didn't break the oaths to the Night's Watch, and I have a reason to let the free folk south of the wall, and all I got was a raised eyebrow. What do you want me to say? At least have the decency to construct well-formed lies. I'm not stupid, you know, Alice sneered. You won't believe me unless I showed you, John sighed, and began to loosen his boiled leather armor and the black tunic underneath. He noted the apprehensive look she was giving him, and he realized he should have explained at first, but he plowed on. With some effort, he took off the armor, and his upper body was free to the naked eye. He watched curiously at Alice Karstark's eyes widened comically. It was the first reaction he managed to glean from her, and he enjoyed it immensely. As you can see, I was stabbed several times in the heart, and yet I am still alive. The truth is I died, and a Red Priestess resurrected me, so technically I died in the service of the Night's Watch, and my watch ended with my death. The new Lord Commander is Edison Tullett, and he, as well as the rest of my former brothers, agreed my watch has ended. John could see his words were having the desired effect as Alice looked at his scars in wonder and a healthy dose of curiosity. I was offered to be legitimized by King Stannis, and he offered me Winterfell long before I became the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. If I really wanted to abandon my watch, I would have done so, and I would be sitting in Winterfell with Roose Bolton and his mad son's head on a spike. As for why I let the wildlings pass the wall, let's just say that the cold winds are rising and the dead rise with it. You are mad! The White Walkers are fairy tales told for scaring children. Are they, my lady? The long night is coming, and the others are marching on the wall. I fought them at Hardhome, and if you ask any brother of the Night's Watch, all of them will tell you the same. The others killed thousands of free folk at Hardhome, and now they will march with them to the wall, 100,000 strong, perhaps more. The North needs to be united, as does all of the 7 kingdoms. Do you think Ramsay Snow can unite the North? He's a fool who tortures and rapes as sport, a mad dog that needs to be put down, and I will. John took a deep breath as he stood up from his seat and stared out of the window into the night sky. He could see the snow falling, and even with his upper torso exposed, he was not feeling that much cold. It was strange, but he had the feeling that it was all because Rhaegal was closing the gap steadily. That was the only reason he had come up with so far. He raped my sister, and he has my brother. I will attack Winterfell, and I will take it by force. Anyone that stands against me I will kill without a shred of mercy. House Umber has already fallen to me, and I have put Moors and Hother Umber's heads on spikes. Even if I sympathize with the grievances House Karstark has against House Stark, I will kill your brother and wipe his house out if I have to. For what Ramsay did to my sister, there will be a reckoning, and anyone that stands with him will be wiped out, root and stem, John stated coldly, startling Alice, who was now looking at him with a healthy dose of fear. What do you want with want me to do? Alice asked as the silence continued to drag on. I want you to write your brother and ask him to abandon his post at Winterfell. Ask him to march his army back from Winterfell and be prepared to face extermination. He will not have to join me. He can return to his castle and stay there for the duration of the war. When the time comes, your house will be compensated in any way your lord brother wishes, so long as it is reasonable. Convey this to your brother, Lady Alice, and it will be the only chance I will extend. I will give him 1 week to remove his armies from Winterfell, but if I see him in the field, remind him what will happen to houses that rebelled with the Boltons in the past. Tell him winter is coming, said John, and he took his leave, leaving Alice in her room with a quill and a piece of parchment. And just before he closed the door of the room, he paused. Do find me when you're finished, and make sure you're dressed to ward off the cold. We will be traveling to the walls soon enough, said John, and with that parting shot, he closed the door, leaving Alice to her thoughts. It didn't take long for Alice to come to a decision as she started to pen a letter to her father. I think it's supposed to be brother. When she penned the letter, John saw to it that the white sun of the Karstarks was taken down and replaced with the direwolf banners that Sansa had hastily sewn for him before he departed. He saved one for Last Hearth, as he had forgotten to place one in the previously conquered castle. There is still some work to be done, as he would have to transport the caravans to the wall. The supplies of food, medicine, and weapons that the Karstarks and Umbers had graciously provided had to be put to good use. As they say, there's no rest for the wicked, and it is a long way back to the wall. Alright, that was Chapter 3. It's been an hour and 44 minutes. I think that's enough reading for now. I think we're going to take a bit of a break, and I'll be back in the later afternoon, probably around like 4 to 5, and I will be doing more WoW streaming. I hope to the 2 people that are listening, I think Kara is one of them, hopefully, that you enjoyed me reading fanfiction, and all the best. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. I want to make reading a much more pronounced part of my streaming sessions. And with that, fanfiction will be one part, but also reading stories and other things and interpretations I want to start doing as well. Alright, thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next stream later.